Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mathew. I am the CEO of Nielsen's Visual IQ business unit. I want to thank all of you for joining us today for lunch. Welcome. Today, what we want to talk about is the topic of marketing effectiveness, probably one of the hottest topics in marketing circles today. And really more excited to be sharing the stage with two really fantastic clients of Nielsen Visual IQ that have been with us for many, many years, for them to share their insights with us. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, so for those of you that have the quest for more detail, please raise your hand and we'll try to get addressed. So with that, let's kick things off. In essence, what I mentioned, we're here to sort of talk about marketing effectiveness. And so this is a popular definition of the term. The measure of how productive a marketer's go-to-market strategy is towards meeting the goal of maximizing their spending to achieve positive results both in the short and the long term. Now, what's key about this definition is really the concept and practice of measurement. And for those of you marketers out there that are dealing with the notion of last click, trying to understand customer journeys, you know that this is pretty hard to accomplish. In fact, in a recent CMO survey, about 90% of CMOs certainly stated this to be a number one initiative, a top priority for the business in terms of understanding how their customers and prospects really interact with their marketing funnel. But only 6% of those marketers have really feel that they've been able to tackle that problem as an enterprise. And so we're excited today. Like I said earlier, we have speakers from The Economist and H&R Block who are going to share their perspectives with us in terms of how they went about solving for this specific problem. But before I get onto the panel and ask questions of Ian and Amy, just a quick sort of overview of what their solutions look like in the space of marketing effectiveness. So with The Economist, in essence, what Ian has in play is the ability to strategically look at his spend and tactically optimize that spend to drive towards higher subscriber growth. And so he is having a holistic view of all of his spend and then sort of optimizing that at a very granular level. Amy, who has been with us for over 9 years, or about 9 years, has a very distinct view into multi-touch attribution and looks at sort of the value of every touch point leading to a conversion or conversion activity. And so that allows her to actually optimize her spend to drive higher ROI during tax season and when she has spend in market. So with that, wanted to quickly introduce our panelists. So we have Ian Noakes, who is the Chief Customer Journey Officer from The Economist. I think that's one of the coolest titles ever. And Amy Hugh, who is Interactive Marketing, VP of Interactive Marketing and Online Experience, which is great. So with that, guys, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps you can tell us sort of what led you to implement your MMM and MTA solutions. Amy, do you want to go first?
So I think that implementation is always what we said earlier. So now the buzzword we hear a lot is performance marketing, performance marketing, performance marketing. But in order to really understand what is performing, you have to have this MTA view at the most granular level. So I think that when we began, it was really to say, what is the path to conversion and what is the optimal sequence and channel mix that will get us there? And when we looked at everything in one silo channel, it wasn't giving us the full journey. So maximizing ROI and seeing the intersection between search and display and email and SEO and organic was critical for us to know where we place our bets.
Excellent. Ian, your take on that?
Sure. Well, we're a 175-year-old organization, and not unlike many other kind of publishers, we've faced certain kind of interesting headwinds, certainly since the last financial crash, which is where we used to make a lot of money from, in terms of revenue from our ad-supported side of our business, we also made an equivalent amount of money or lesser amount of money from our subscription side of our business. There's a lot of kind of headwinds in the regard in terms of do we move down the ad-funded model, as many other kind of businesses had, or do we place a strategic bet on subscription marketing? Now, at the time, we had to kind of get a better sense of what was really working. And last touch, we knew what our trading channels were, and we knew what our offers were working, but we couldn't necessarily scale it. The reason we could scale those things was we required further content marketing to be used. Now, we're not short on content. We've got 175 years worth of content and stuff pumping out every single day. But we equally need to get people to understand our access model and to get them to pay over $200 a year for a subscription. So to reach a newer audience, we had to then further up the marketing funnel to get this. And last touch attribution and trusting what came through on the last kind of order pages wasn't the way to do this. Trying to compare and then certainly going to get sign-off for using content-led initiatives in social and in display, and even arguing the case for affiliates, were generally given a lot of pushback on a last touch basis. So for us, we had to then prove the incremental role of each part of the marketing mix on the path to a subscriber's subscription.
Excellent. So just sticking with you, Ian, as you went down this path of sort of taking on MMM and MTA, what were some of the biggest hurdles challenges that the business had in terms of adopting the platforms?
Sure. Well, the first challenge I had was on day one, and I was told I had three things to resolve. One, which was attribution, and the second was attribution, and the third was attribution. So you could argue I had a fairly clear brief. But part of the challenge with that, however, was actually then getting the kind of intent and then getting the business to sign off. So the first part that we had to hurdles we had to get over is, why should I take some money out of our marketing mix in terms of our direct-to-consumer efforts to put into a measurement solution? Because every dollar taken off was very much seen as a dollar then wasted. We're arguing the point which is, sooner or later, we will hit a point of diminishing returns in any one of our channels. And therefore, if we don't know when it's coming or where we can optimize to, then we need to be ahead of that decision and curve. So the first thing was to try and get it signed off. And to get that sign off, we ran a number of kind of models, both using our existing web analytics architecture, looking at first point, rules-based, and other last touch comparisons, and then coming up with statistical models which weren't happening in a kind of very dynamic fashion. So decisions were moving at a quicker pace than the ability for us to then reproduce these models. So what we're trying to get to a sense of is we needed greater agility, the ability to kind of move spend both within channels and across channels, but also within channels and across markets and regions globally. We didn't want to just do this in one channel across one market, or even across a set of channels in a single market. We needed to have this fly across the global market footprint that we have across key markets straight off the bat. So our biggest challenge at first was really to try and get the sign-off on that front. And luckily, we have a very pragmatic CMO who's now, following a restructure, kind of moved on. But also, we have a history of, a track record of positive growth. So having the, hippo on board was a key benefit of getting it in terms of, we want to double our circulation within 5 years, and we're well on the path to doing that.
Excellent. Amy, you're now on this journey for almost 8-9 years. And I look back on our relationship. It sounds like a lot of decisions you made early on had a lot of foresight into where we are today. But what were some of the hurdles that you took on from way back when to get you to the place where you are today?
Well, I think the hurdle's still the same. And as new people and new C-suite comes in, it's still the same problem, which is understanding the basis of education about attribution. It's highly technical. It's a technology-based solution. And all of a sudden, as modern marketers, I think that the education, we used to talk to each other like we were talking to other digital marketers. And I think that we sort of stopped doing that a couple of years ago. But all of a sudden, the modern marketer we're analysts, we do programmatic, we know a little bit about coding, so we're in IT, we're in finance because we have to justify ROI, and we still have to create great experiences. And so part of the challenge is translating what attribution means individually to every single one of those departments. So when you talk to IT, you talk it through the language of coding. When you talk to finance, you talk about it through the lens of ROI. But what that means for marketers is you're a Renaissance person now, and you have to know a little bit of everything. And I think that's still the hurdle and will continue to be the hurdle because the lack of understanding is going to lead to the lack of adoption And you need all of those people to execute the multi-touch attribution. Every single one of those people need to be hands-on and agree to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to sort of what you guys have learned through these processes, some of the insights, if you can share that with the audience, just curious, so you have online experience in your title, you have customer journey in your title. Can you share some sort of, do you see that as an integral component to how marketing effectiveness works? Because most folks think of it as sort of upper funnel optimization, where it looks like you guys are thinking as a holistic view of the customer, prospect or customer. Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we made that merge about 3 or 4 years ago because we simply say that when people ask me what my job is at H&R Block, I just say I drive traffic and I close traffic, right? I drive online and foot traffic and then I got to close it. And so the traffic that you're driving needs unique customized experiences on .com or anywhere else in order for it to be truly personalized. I think that customers these days are completely, they want you to anticipate their needs, they want it to be really fast, and they want the experience to be really easy. So all of a sudden, you have to target the right people with media, you have to make the right best with optimization, and then using that data, you can create special experiences on .com, and then all of a sudden it is a journey.
Yep.
And so I think that the movement is that it can't be seen in isolation.
Yeah.
I agree, and the hints in my title, it's a journey. It's never done. Once you get something done, you've got to move on to the next piece, and nothing's ever going to be perfect. I think in the previous, one of the previous sessions earlier this morning, which was very much, again, playing out the journey piece, and that you're going to have to deal with imperfection. You're not going to get a perfect answer. Now, the audiences I'm dealing with internally are both finance on one side that hold the money, and then we're dealing with the other side with the ambition for marketers. But equally, they have incentives given in any one channel to make sure their channel is profitable, and they're being seen to be careful as well as ambitious with their spend. That also drives bias in what they see in the short to medium term. So when you do come up with alternative views or lenses on what could be happening and driving that effect, it sometimes is either greeted with a lot of great success and open arms, and you're their best friend because you've just proven everything that they've ever done is right. On the other side, you're also seen as the Antichrist, which is that's completely away from what my belief system is, and therefore it doesn't match. And what you're having to deal with is do this progressively. You can't go from 0 to 100 miles an hour and expect people to be with you at that point all the way through. You have to break it down with them bit by bit by bit. Yeah. And the way that we've done this is we went straight out the blocks on our MTA solution to effectively get the plumbing in. Firsthand, worldwide, make sure all our agencies did everything correctly, the right way, universally. But that didn't mean we're optimizing from day one worldwide. We started with a single channel, one of the channels which was getting a lot of grief, which is display. And what we then did is then focused on one market, and then within that market, what was then happening within that channel. Then we progressively moved out to that channel across multiple markets, and then multiple tactics, and then multiple channels, multiple markets, and we just edged out. That way, what you then ended up with is a cadence in terms of a set of communications to then build confidence over time. So as you tested it, you started to move, not too aggressively, to get to the next level.
Yep, excellent. Well, sticking with you, Ian, can you share perhaps some of the insights or learnings or monetary aspects, benefits that you guys have seen through your implementation?
Sure. One of the interesting things, which was early on, is there's this view that, there's this halo effect that comes off any one particular channel's kind of effect in market. So the other side is that there was also a view that only paid marketing with an offer could actually be proven to have an effect on an outcome. Now, we dismissed both those pieces straight off the bat. The reason is that attribution is a double-edged sword. If you're going in with it to kind of almost come in it from a bias where you're expecting your channel to look better or worse, be prepared that it will not. It may not be better or worse, but what does that then lead you to? It's not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. Understand that there is both a positive side to any kind of kind of decision as well as a negative side, but as long as you can learn from those, that's the important piece. What we have established is that we also mapped up everything to do with our organic and our earned channels, as well as anything of our paid channels, the stuff that we knew we could put more money behind, but also to then prove that the efforts we're putting in feed and social through our editorial platforms, to the email newsletters that you signed it up for, anything that we could own and therefore could have push with zero cost, but with a lot of kind of headcount behind, we needed to prove it out. And what we have proven is that content does work, It drives a lot of kind of like traffic and interaction back to our primary sites where people see and understand the access model. We've also understood that paid social is a core driver, and we can scale that to certain points, but it also means that we can start to chest some edgy things about the seed audiences that make up the algorithms that then bid on. We've also then been able to then take money out of PPC, which was seen as a heresy initially, and then shift it to other areas like paid social.
Yep.
And we've done some other interesting things to really just going to start moving things around in a far more pragmatic way than ever before.
Excellent. I think the key point you said is, I think when most folks think of attribution, they think of it as a paid, optimizing your paid upper funnel aspect, but your point is, by looking at paid, earned, and owned, provides a holistic sort of journey, insight into your customer and prospects in terms of how they interact with the brand.
Yep.
Excellent. Amy, how about you? I mean, obviously 9 years in and still reaping benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more sophisticated things that we've done is that we've actually used VIQ and inserted placebo ads to really show the incrementality of our media spend. For someone like H&R Block, whose sole product is doing taxes, the CFO will say to you, we have 99% awareness, and you are all held hostage because you all have jobs to do this buy this particular product. How do we know that your media is working? So when we inserted the placebo ads into the MTA, and because you looked at the path of converters and non-converters, we were really able to show the incrementality and the lift. And when we did that a few years ago, and it's an expensive lesson to learn, but it's a great lesson because you can really start to prove, yes, you are moving the needle. Here is where your diminishing rate of returns are. Here is the actual value you drive to the business outcomes. So I think that that's been one of the biggest learnings we've had. My team and I, we've really been able to come up with some creative analogies to explain attribution. And that's if you guys don't have one, you need to get a story so you can explain it to like your receptionist. And if you could do that, then you have a great way of sort of evangelizing what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing, because we're talking about customer journeys, and to what extent do you guys think of integrating audience level attributes into that equation to provide so instead of looking at attribution from only a media-centric lens, looking at it from how you're performing against audience reach or audience effectiveness? Amy?
So that's where we are now. Okay. So we are at the point where we moved away from cookie targeting, and then and now we're at identity. So we are able to take the multi-touch attribution because at a log level, and then look at the actual customer one-to-one experience, and then say where is the incrementality, who is the audience that is most valuable, who is our prospecting audience, and what was the path and touch points that took them there to our site. So we are now just moving to a world where we're taxpaying, we're taxes, right? So one of the great aspects about us is we have the cleanest, best first party data in probably like in the top 10. I mean, you can lie about your taxes. I wouldn't recommend that. And because you wouldn't, we have the best first party data. And then when we feed it into the attribution machine, then you are able to say who is valuable, who isn't valuable, and we personalize hnrblock.com to that individual level based on the media that they're interacting with, based on the fact if they're a prior customer, and then also what they're doing on site.
Excellent. Ian, your perspective on audience integration with attribution?
Sure. Well, we're using a customer data platform. We've had it in play now for about 18 months as well, and we're trying to move to the point where we're really understanding audiences and what we should be doing with those audiences at different points on the path to subscription. So what that allows us to move away from is some of the kind of like simpler things, which is based off, male or female, certain affluence and certain ages, to really getting a sense of content affinities, likelihood to kind of pass through trial, likelihood to actually provide long-term kind of revenue for the business, and then use those as seed audiences to then test those assumptions back into the bidding systems directly into Facebook, directly into Google, to get a sense of whether we believe, one, we can scale them, or two, whether we are going to see some level of inefficiencies returning on that front. We're at the early doors in that stage, but it's interesting.
That's great. One last question, and we'll open up to the audience here. So from a measurement perspective, what would you like to see, sort of the holy grail element? That's sort of the dark spot in your measurement spectrum. Amy?
I think that everyone's moving towards this idea of unified media measurement, merging top-down to bottoms-up, and how does really the top-down of TV and radio and the things that are not so trackable, how does that influence conversion to that bottom individual so you can optimize both together? I don't think the industry is quite there yet, and it's something that we're constantly talking about with our partners about how do we better measure those synergistic effects, and what is the partner or the technology that will get us there? Are we going to be using geolocation? Are we going to be using cross-device? Are we going to be using MTA? And the answer is all of it. Yeah. And so that plumbing and that stitch is still really, really difficult to do right now.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd agree on unified measurement, absolutely. And I think it's a theme that came out again from one of the earlier things in the earlier session. One of the challenges that we have, of course, as a news organization is there are external events which we can both benefit from. So the election of your current president has clearly been very good for the news industry, including us. But equally, a tweet which is sent out and kind of unplanned, we can benefit from. We can react and we can provide, great, covers on that front. As an example, the Charlottesville got a lot of pickup, but then because we happened to have a cover that resonated, the point of then getting a sense of what really worked, was it the PR or was it the external event that drove that success? And we're trying to really unpick those pieces. So we can ride the waves when they appear. We can plan for things such as elections and midterms and other elements that are happening around the world. But equally, we need to also then react. So part of our balance is trying to get a sense of some of the hardest to measure pieces, which is unstitching, what happens in the open market that goes into what would traditionally be measured in PR. PR is a hugely important but very, very difficult element to measure, especially given that anything that we see in terms of traction, if we're writing about it, is going to algorithmically be picked up on straight away in any of our bidding engines. So how do we then unpick the fact that a story was seeded from PR that had a role in something that then got huge digital traction? They're not simple things to solve. They're not trivial. But again, a unified view to scale spend is something which we'd like to have. But appreciating that nothing level will be perfect, we will have to deal with imperfections. You'll have to deal with directional insights and make a bet and put tests to prove your hypotheses were better or worse than they were before. If 5% better, 2% better is better.
That's right. That's a key point. I mean, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, so to speak, right? So that's great testament to both of you guys, where you took insights from the system and learn through the process, which is great. Okay, so we're going to open it up to the audience. If you guys have questions for Ian, Amy, or myself, don't be shy. There's a question back there, and over there. Why don't we, okay.
Hi, Amy, I have a question for you. You obviously have a peak seasonality to your consumer business with taxes, as you mentioned, but also you have returning customers, I'm sure, year over year. Has your attribution model been able to provide insights into the engagements and activities outside of tax season that I'm sure you try and talk to that customer all year long? And how do you think about that?
So we do have extreme seasonality, right? And so the unfortunate part about H&R Block and taxes is you don't really want to talk to me in the summer months. Like, no one really wants to think about their taxes. But one of the things that we've been doing is that's why we're onboarding our first party data into LiveRamp, so we can re-engage our cookie pools, so we can really understand that split between returning and prospecting, and then building lookalike models off of it. So we learned that we don't have to be always on in order to keep those IDs alive.
Question right here. How do you turn the insights that you're getting into the learnings and understanding what you actually do about understanding that this channel is driving more and what it is within the channel? How granular can you go Let's say within an ad, is it the copy, is it the image, is it the content that was pushed through that channel that was actually driving the results, as opposed to the fact that it was channel per se? So how do you turn that into action later on?
Sure. Well, I'll just provide some perspective on sort of how the attribution aspect, or how multi-touch attribution typically works on our side. And then any insight from you guys to add to that would be great. So multi-touch attribution, the way we think about it is less about path analysis. It's more about the combination of path, each touch point, and the attributes of each touch point. That means that we can essentially decompose the value of a creative, anything that's tagged and pixeled really. So keyword all the way down to keyword, really all the way down to granular aspects of that touch point. So time, frequency, size of the creative, anything you feed the engine really. So the output is manifested in a series of recommendations really. So you can reallocate spend either at a channel level or sub-channel level or attributes within that channel. So, and it's really dependent on the advertiser or the agency in terms of how deep or at macro level they want to stay at. But do you guys have insights you want to share in terms of what you might have put in market?
Yeah, we definitely want to go to as granular as possible, and all that data will come to you, and you could get to placement, day part, creative mix, call to action, again, whatever you want to tag. But then what I warn about that is that there's just so much data, right? And then all of a sudden there's so much artifact into what really did drive conversion. So that's where you have to design your experimentation. And that's the best part about the data. The data is just informing you of some hypotheses that you want to further test and drill down. And running clean tests is critical because there is so much. All attribution is really trying to measure is the influence of one channel over the other, right? So if you want to mix your metaphors and go really granular and then still look at the synergistic effect and halo, then you have to run really, really, really clean tests. You have to be very clear about what you're trying to learn and just do that. And then you isolate and then you can add.
Great question.
So, sort of related to the gentleman's first question, how much are your models really optimized for acquisition as opposed to like lifetime value, taking attrition into account for your business, the renewal of subscriptions? Is it more towards just the acquisition, or are you trying to take into account the lifetime value, how easy it is to renew them, those kinds of things?
Sure. Well, what we do is we don't necessarily model on the lifetime value of an individual LTV in terms of how the business runs. Is certainly looking at the LTV of a last touch channel that kind of comes through rather than at the audience level. And we're moving to a kind of fractionally led LTV model. However, that aside, is the event we're really looking for is do people pass an introductory trial offer, which in the case in the US, you can get 12 for 12, so $12 for 12 weeks. So after that first quarter, you then jump up to about $50. So on that basis, we're interested in those people that make it over that leap, over that step. And what we then do is we try and take that data, and then we stitch it back into the actual model with a set of IDs, and then model against that outcome. What that then allows us to do is look at the 2 points of reference to then get a sense of what was most efficient in driving volume initially to get that take up. Then also what was very in terms of the audiences, or how those channels performed in terms of stick. We could do it at a future point, like a year down the line, but there's a lot of other things that go into it in terms of usability and whether they use the product or not. But they're the two things which we're currently doing. Yeah.
So one point I'd add to Ian's response is something Amy said earlier, which is when you look at attribution, at least these days, it's not enough to look at it just from a media-centric perspective. So the example Amy had used earlier was looking at it from an audience segment perspective. So you can look and see how effectively did I reach an audience. And if you feed the system a lifetime value or any other metric that describes that audience, you can now understand sort of what tactics were in market to help you acquire an audience that was the most valuable to the business or the least valuable to business, because it's something that is being updated pretty much every day. Any other questions? Right there.
Just a question on what do you guys think about the future of attribution? You guys, the keynote talked about the rise of the walled gardens. digital privacy and all that stuff, what do you think will happen to multi-touch attribution in that sense?
You're the visionary.
I'm not visionary. I think that I think that walled gardens are a challenge, right? I think that they're a walled garden for a reason, and that it's going to be incredibly difficult to not to have to rent their data. Anytime we go with Google or Facebook, I always say we're renting the data because we don't own the data. And so in order to get around that, I think that for H&R Block, our perspective is that we own our own data. So we've started on this journey where we are not on the Google ad tech stack, we're not on the Adobe stack, we're not on the Salesforce stack. We sort of stitched ours together, and VIQ is just one of the partners that we stitched together to maintain as much of data autonomy and independence as possible, because there is a world where because people aren't always on Google and Facebook, right? Like, you have to remember that. Like, they don't want you to know that. Like, but it's true because you are off Google and Facebook properties. And so our goal is to really understand when you move off of those properties and how we convert you. Because you're shopping, you're gonna be reading, there's all sorts of different types of inventory out there. And so I don't know what the future is gonna bring, but I think that our goal is to maintain as much autonomy and independence, and to validate what the people who are buying your media from and reporting on their A+ work, is it really A+ work? Probably not. And the only way you're gonna have to know that is if you can have a sense of your own independence, your own test and control, and it doesn't have to be an ad tech stack, it doesn't have to be anything very formal. Even if you just create your own A/B experiments and try to like say, that doesn't ring true to me, right? I think that's probably the only place that as brands and advertisers we have any course for right now.
I'd agree. I think I don't think there'll ever be a single means of looking at your marketing activity and saying this is my view of the world. It's going to constantly change. GDPR has made sizable impact on what we can and cannot do. But equally, with 80 cents of every dollar going into either Facebook or Google, there'll always be that kind of like reliance. You have to have them at least accounted for. The same thing as Amy was saying is that you don't necessarily just trust one person from one solution telling you what has worked. We like our agencies, we think they're fantastic at what they do, but we don't just take their word for it. The fact that they've got a particular display plan may be heavily favoring something to do with incentives, could be, but it's not likely because of our contracts. But what we can then challenge is, depending on what they're optimizing for. Are they optimizing for reach? Are they optimizing for clicks? And do those things actually lead to a quality outcome? And if in time it means that we're less able to measure it because of privacy and other reasons, well, then we'll have an alternative lens to then look at it. So we always have at least 2 points, ideally 3 points of triangulation to look at any one kind of movement and see how that is trending over time. And if they're all saying, if 2 out of 3 things are saying it's a pretty good thing, we're going to stick with it. If it's 3 out of 3, we're going for it. Absolutely full sticks forward. And if it's the other way around, then there's questions, and the teams have to then justify what they're doing, either through test design and or through what they're doing in terms of their investment plans going forward. It's not hard, it just becomes harder to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have VIQ as a partner, because it is a third-party independent source that is not your agency and is not your media partners, and so it allows you to have that third leg so you could triangulate data in a much more controlled way than if someone else is just reporting on it on your behalf.
Excellent. Thank you, folks, for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for your insights and wisdom. Thank you.